Hey everyone, Danny California here, and today I want to talk about the most mythical of all derby maneuvers, the Star Pass. Now, everyone and their mother calls this thing a panty, but I'm going to call it a cover or the star cover, because every time you say the word panty, Justin Bieber sells an album. No, think of the kids. Okay, none of that is true, but panty tops like everyone's gross word list, along with things like moist and phlegm. Ugh, it's even spelled gross. And I really want everyone to pay attention to what I say instead of going bleh, bleh, blah every 3 seconds. I personally like to think of the Star Pass as like the unicorn of roller derby because it's rare and beautiful. But when you get right down to it, it's just a horsey that can stab you with its face. And what I mean by that is, yeah, the Star Pass can work out sometimes, but a lot of times it just turns into a big hot mess. So what actually happens during a Star Pass? Well, first the jammer takes the star cover off of her helmet. Once she does this, she's considered the inactive jammer and is not eligible to accrue any points. She then passes off that cover to her pivot, and once the pivot puts the cover on her helmet, the pivot is now the new jammer, and the former jammer is now a blocker. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, as with anything else, the devil is in the details. There are quite a few rules in place for the Star Pass, which can make it a bit difficult to complete successfully. First things first, the jammer has to hand off the star to her pivot. She can't throw it to the pivot. Catch it, girl! And she also can't hand it off to other teammates to hand to the pivot, like Hands Across America style. If during the Star Pass the cover is dropped, which happens more than you might think, only the jammer or the pivot can pick it up. Additionally, both the jammer and the pivot must be in bounds and in the engagement zone in order to pass the star legally. Now here's where it starts to get a little wonky. The jammer cannot pass her star to a pivot that's in queue for the penalty box. And I know what you're thinking. Duh! Why would I pass my star to a pivot that's clearly on her way to the penalty box? Well, sometimes it's not that clear. Like, for instance, if I'm a jammer and I take my star off, but right when I do that, the pivot gets called on a penalty, well, now I can't pass it to her anymore. I have to put it back on my helmet and continue jamming. Or let's say my pivot gets called on a penalty, reports the penalty box, but it's full. So now she has to skate back on the track and wait for a spot to open. Well, if I'm jamming and I see my pivot on the track, I'm just assuming she's someone that I can hand the star to. But in reality, she is in queue for the penalty box, and I cannot legally hand her my star cover. Similarly, the jammer is not allowed to hand off her star cover if she's in queue for the penalty box. Duh? Once again, this sounds straightforward, but it's kinda not. So let's say I'm jamming and I take off my star cover to hand to my pivot. Well, until that pivot successfully puts that star cover on her helmet, I am still the jammer. And at any point, if I am called for a penalty before she successfully puts that star cover on her helmet, I must report to the box as the jammer. As you can imagine, this causes a lot of confusion. As the jammer is being sent to the penalty box as the jammer, the pivot thinks that she's the jammer and takes off to go on a scoring pass. Well, at that point, the pivot is still a blocker because the star pass was not successfully completed. And at that point, if she's not careful, she might be called on a penalty for failure to return to the engagement zone. In addition to all of the crazy legal complications that come with the Star Pass, you also have to think of the strategic implications of the maneuver. For example, if the jammer has lead jammer status, when she takes her star cover off, she immediately loses that status and is ineligible to get it back, even if she puts her star cover back on. When she hands off her star cover to the pivot, lead jammer status is not transferred to the pivot. It's gone for the rest of the jam. Lead jammer status is a pretty important card to hold in a jam, and I can't think of too many reasons why you would want to intentionally give that up. Also, if your pivot doesn't have a lot of practice at jamming, she might run into some penalty problems because she's now playing a position she's not used to. So for all you pivots out there, practice jamming, just in case. So if you and your team are really intent on using the Star Pass as part of your game, just remember to practice it, be prepared for complications, and know when and where to use it, and you just might be able to avoid being metaphorically face-stabbed by the Star Pass. Panty, 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 panty. Whoa.